Sorry to keep you waiting. There we go. All right, maybe I shouldn't do this. It's the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thanks for finding me. Let's see if I can do this. Michael Banks, the federal government's Border Patrol chief, quit on Thursday after reports that he visited prostitutes on overseas trips. Banks, before Trump appointed him, ran Operation Lone Star, Texas Governor Greg Abbott's border initiative to round up migrants in Texas and then put them on buses, airplanes heading for California, New York, and Martha's Vineyard. It was the height of cruelty. Whistleblowers are now accusing Banks of bragging about his sexual tourism, trips he took to Colombia and Thailand. Now, because prostitutes in those countries are most likely to be victims of human trafficking, multiple Border Patrol agents stepped forward, complaining that Banks was subsidizing the very thing he was tasked with stopping. Border Patrol is part of the Department of Homeland Security, which began an internal investigation into Banks's trips, but that probe was quickly quashed by someone in then Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem's office. The Pentagon divides the globe into 6 distinct geographic combatant commands, and each one of those 6 commands has its own commander. So this is the map. You see U.S. Africa Command, U.S. European Command, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, U.S. Northern Command, U.S. Southern Command, and right there in the middle, between AFRICOM, PACCOM, and European Com is U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM. You always hear CENTCOM, and that's the Middle East. It's CENTCOM that's running the war in Iran and the blockade of Hormuz. And just to make it even more confusing, CENTCOM is headquartered in Tampa, Florida. They don't want you to understand any of this. Admiral Brad Cooper, not Bradley Cooper, this is the bad Brad Cooper, he's in charge of CENTCOM, and he, more than Pete Hegseth or Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, Brad Cooper is making the day-to-day decisions, picking targets and telling Donald Trump what can and can't be done to Iran. In many ways, those above him are the cheerleaders. It is Admiral Brad Cooper who is running the show. On Thursday, Admiral Cooper testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, partly to discuss the war with Iran, but also to plan the 2027 budget, where Donald Trump and the Pentagon are asking Congress for an increase from a little under $1 trillion a year for the Pentagon to $1.5 trillion for fiscal year 2027. It's a 50% increase. Inflation is out of control. It's inflation. During his testimony, Admiral Cooper told lawmakers that since the bombing campaign began on February 28th, the United States military succeeded in checking every single box when it comes to meeting its military objectives in its war against Iran. Every box. Which boxes are those? Making sure Iran closes Hormuz? Check. Making sure the United States closes Hormuz right after Iran threatens to open it back up? Check. Doubling the price of oil and fertilizer? Check. Increasing inflation at the fastest rate in nearly 4 years? Check. Doubling profits for the oil companies? Check, check, double check, triple check, quadruple check. Well, it's not all bad. I have some great news for those Americans who are concerned about civilian casualties in Iran. Since the bombing campaign began back on February 28th, the United States has dropped 13,600 bombs on the Iranian people, and we've destroyed close to 120,000 civilian buildings. But and that doesn't count what Israel's done. According to Admiral Cooper, however, he runs CENTCOM, we have a near perfect record. Now, I thought when he said near perfect record, he meant a near perfect record of killing civilians with every single airstrike. Turns out it's the complete opposite. Admiral Cooper testified under oath on Thursday that avoiding civilian casualties is his number one concern. That's why CENTCOM's team for mitigating civilian harm was cut in the past year from 10 full-time staffers to just 1. That's how much Admiral Cooper cares about mitigating civilian harm. He fired 90% of the full-time staffers in charge of making sure innocent civilians don't get killed by our airstrike. 90% fired. I guess they've done such a great job avoiding civilian harm that Admiral Cooper figured there's no need for anyone to work on reducing civilian casualties since it's not a problem. We have a near perfect record. So let's just get rid of everybody. Keep one person around so we have somebody to brag about how our Pentagon doesn't kill civilians because we have smart missiles. We have really smart missiles. They never hit the wrong targets. They never hit an elementary school and kill close to 200 kids because their smart missile accidentally mistook the elementary school for a naval base. I mean, even smart missiles can mistake an elementary school for a naval base. So God bless Admiral Cooper. This is the cleanest war we've ever fought. No civilian casualties. Why would he lie about that? But that's not good enough for New York Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. No, she decided to insult the Admiral by asking some rude questions Thursday about our military airstrikes hitting not just that Iranian elementary school, but also several other schools and hospitals. Here is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand trying to score cheap political points by bringing up the truth.
We have data and information publicly available in publications like the New York Times that 22 schools have been hit, hospitals, dozens of hospitals have been hit. We have regulations. We have the law of war. We have human rights obligations. We have our own targeting requirements to avoid civilian harm and death. Have you been implementing all the laws that are required under current law to minimize civilian death?
Senator, we have executed every operation consistent with the law of armed conflict. The subject of civilian casualties is a particular passion of mine. We pay attention to it. We follow all the procedures and have gone above and beyond to, in my case, personally warn the Iranian people of several instances during conflict where they were being potentially used as human targets. If they've been warned,
how did we then bomb 22 schools?
There's no indication that we have that has been corroborated. Zero.
How many schools have we bombed?
There is one active civilian casualty investigation from the 13,629 munitions.
So how do you explain the publicly available information that 22 schools have been hit and multiple hospitals?
There's no way that we can corroborate that. No indication of that whatsoever, Senator.
There's no way you can corroborate or no indication of it? Which one?
No indication.
Well, the indication is what's publicly available. There is indication. Have you investigated those claims?
We have not.
Why have you not? If this is a passion of yours, if you believe that the civilian casualties are not consistent with the law of war and not consistent with human rights obligations that our military regularly follows with great pride and great diligence, why have you not investigated those allegations when they're publicly being made on the cover of the New York Times?
I'll be happy to take a look at each instance.
I would like a report.
Will be able to do that.
I would like a report from you, from your team, about whether there have been attacks that have resulted in the destruction of schools and hospitals. And if so, why? And how then, last, have you managed the 90% cut to the personnel who are supposed to avoid civilian targets?
Happy to provide any report, and I would invite you and every staff member here to come to Tampa to look at the process to see exactly how it works.
Thank you, Admiral.
How many medals? Does he have any jacket, or is it just all medals? And I have a question for people who served in the military in the 60s or early 70s. Am I wrong? I may be wrong. I'm on muscle relaxers. There was a time when generals and admirals testified, I believe, before the Senate and the House in suits. They didn't wear their medals, that it was considered unseemly and intimidating. We have civilian control of the military, so it was deemed improper for an admiral or a general to wear all those medals. And then, as I recall, it changed when Oliver North testified before the Iran-Contra hearings, and he showed up in his uniform with all the medals. Leave a comment. I'm on muscle relaxers, but it seems to me before Oliver North testified in the Iran-Contra hearings, it was considered unseemly for somebody in the military to hide behind their medals. Leave a comment. I'll research that and get back to you on our next show, Senator. This is Virginia's junior senator, Tim Kaine. He also sits on the Armed Services Committee. And as you can see, his receding hairline is nearsighted. Look at that. His receding hairline can't see a damn thing without long-distance glasses that barely work. Senator Tim Kaine doesn't ask for sympathy. He was born with a nearsighted, receding hairline. The man's receding hairline is, for all intents and purposes, legally blind. Senator Kaine sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He had some questions on Thursday for Admiral Cooper, who runs CENTCOM. Now, Senator Kaine, as you can see, his receding hairline is legally blind. Senator Kaine wanted to know how the Pentagon has the gall to ask for $1.5 trillion for fiscal year 2027, but can't provide the Armed Services Committee with a legal justification for the war in Iran. The Justice Department has what is called the OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, where the Office of Legal Counsel draws up memorandums on the legal responsibilities for the Justice Department. The Office of Legal Counsel determines what is legal and what is not legal for the Justice Department. And because the Department of Justice has to defend the war and the Pentagon, it has to write up a legal rationale for the war in Iran. Therefore, a memo from the Office of Legal Counsel before the bombing campaign began on February 28th, that memo had to be prepared by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, and that memo outlines the legitimacy, the legal legitimacy of the war, what the purpose of this war is, why it's constitutional and doesn't violate any statutes like the War Crimes Act of 1996, which it does. So there is a memo. The Justice Department, Pam Bondi, drew up a legal rationale for this illegal war in Iran. But the Armed Services Committee is unable to see the memo. Now, Senator Tim Kaine's receding hairline can't see the memo because Tim Kaine's receding hairline, as you can see, is legally blind. It can't see anything, but nobody can see this memo because the Justice Department and the Pentagon refused to make this memo available to the Armed Services Committee. Again, Senator Tim Kaine's receding hairline couldn't see the memo even if it were made available, unless they had a version in Braille. But here is Senator Tim Kaine asking about the legal memo.
Admiral Cooper, and to my colleagues on the committee, here's something that's pretty amazing that we shouldn't settle for. The administration is refusing to allow members of this committee to see the OLC opinion stating the legal case for war. We've always had the ability. We're armed services members. We're being asked to fund a $1.5 trillion budget, but our request to the DOJ to see the OLC opinion justifying this war, they have refused to allow members of the Armed Services Committee to see it. U.S. senators, appropriators, we're not allowed to see it. What are they hiding? If they will not allow us to see the legal rationale for the war, what are they hiding? And Mr. Charles just conclude and say, I hope we might, as a committee, whatever our agreements about the wisdom or the legality of the war, I hope we might, as a committee, agree that we should at least, in a classified setting, be able to read the legal opinion upon which this entire 76-day war is based. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Everything this administration does is lawless. It is a total disregard for the law. We have a convicted felon, an adjudicated rapist as our commander-in-chief. Everything he does is against the law, which is why he has to steal the midterms, because it's going to be a lot worse than it was in 2019 and 2020 during his first term. And if he doesn't return to the Oval Office for a third illegal term, think of what Rudy Giuliani has been through. It's going to be 10 times worse for Donald Trump. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Now back to what I was just talking about. In September of 2024, Rudy Giuliani's license to practice law in Washington, D.C. was stripped from him permanently after it had been taken from him also in New York State. Giuliani was found to have made false statements in attempting to prove Joe Biden stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump. John Eastman, seen here delivering his January 6th speech on the ellipse alongside Rudy Giuliani before Donald Trump incited that insurrection. John Eastman, the lawyer, was disbarred, cannot practice law in the state of California due to his false statements, attempting to orchestrate the false elector scheme while at the same time claiming Mike Pence's role on January 6 was more than purely ceremonial. Eastman's law license in Washington, D.C. has been suspended, but it has yet to be taken from him the way it has been in California. This is Kenneth Chesebro. He was one of Trump's lawyers who was instrumental in the false elector scheme. He, along with two other Trump lawyers, Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis, pled guilty in that RICO trial down in Fulton County, Georgia. Chesebro's license to practice law in New York State was taken from him permanently, his law license in Washington, D.C. suspended. Sidney Powell pled guilty to 6 misdemeanors in that Fulton County, Georgia RICO trial. As a member of the Texas bar, she has been allowed to keep her license. They tried to disbar her from the Texas Bar Association. They failed. There's been no effort to strip Sidney Powell of her license to practice law in Washington, D.C., but 3 of her associates, 3 of her legal associates who assisted her in filing lawsuits that challenge the 2020 election, they now face possible suspension of their law licenses in Washington, D.C. In order to have your law license suspended or permanently stripped, it depends which state or district you're talking about. For example, in California, where John Eastman just got stripped of his law license, it is the state Supreme Court that serves as the final arbiter. But the process up until it gets to the Supreme Court, what happened? What? Come on. What's going on? It was just getting bad. Hang on. Don't worry. I see everybody said don't do the show today. You got muscle relaxers. Hang on, just hang on. Don't panic. There we go. See? It's not the muscle relaxers. Okay, now I got to start the entire show from the beginning. Some weird stuff has been going on, but, you know, it's a good thing I'm paranoid. Okay, so getting your law license stripped. It depends on which state and which district you're talking about. John Eastman had his law license taken from him in California. The state Supreme Court of California is the final decider as to whether or not somebody's law license is taken. But the process, up until it reaches the state Supreme Court in California, is controlled by the California State Bar Association, which is essentially, it's a trade group. They protect their own. Believe me, there were several divorce attorneys that I have tried to get disbarred in California, but they sit on the disciplinary board. So bar associations have for most civilians, they have a bad taste in our mouth, right? But it's different in Washington, D.C. In D.C., the Bar Association has nothing to do with disciplining attorneys who are licensed to practice in our nation's capital. That whole process, the whole disciplinary process, is controlled by the judiciary branch of our government. We have three branches: the judiciary branch, the judges, the legislative branch, Congress, and the executive branch, the president. Okay? So if you want to discipline a lawyer who's licensed to practice in Washington, D.C., you don't go to the Washington, D.C. Bar Association first, the way you would in California. You go directly to the Washington, D.C. Court of Appeals, the judges. So again, in states like California, you have lawyers who sit on the Bar Association's disciplinary board, and they get the first blush of the complaint. Again, it's next to impossible to get a divorce attorney in Los Angeles disbarred, because the one that I try to get disbarred sat on the disciplinary board. I got even with him in other ways. I should do a whole show about getting even with lawyers. Don't pay them. That's one thing to do. Anyway, if you're going through a divorce and you owe your divorce attorney money, don't pay. For another show. Hang on, I'm just, my back hurts. I have a bad back and it's repressed rage. And I'm thinking of this one divorce attorney, and I want to bring up his name and show you his picture and give you his cell phone number. But I'm like, the muscle relaxers are not that good for me to do something that self-destructive. Okay. Washington, I'm getting to a larger point. Maybe I shouldn't have done the show today. Okay. In Washington, D.C., the disciplinary board, if you want to take a lawyer, get him disciplined, the disciplinary board is appointed by judges who sit on the D.C. Court of Appeals. It's much better in D.C. If you have a complaint about a D.C. lawyer, your first complaint goes to a panel of 9. It's 7 attorneys plus 2 members of the public who cannot be lawyers. It's fantastic. And they review complaints filed against attorneys who are licensed to practice in Washington, D.C. And they decide whether to escalate the complaint higher up to a panel of actual judges. And eventually, it is a panel of judges who decide whether or not to strip an attorney of their license to practice law in Washington, D.C. It's not other attorneys protecting other attorneys. The process begins with civilians and some lawyers and ends and then is completely decided upon by judges. Most Americans don't know this. and they think the Washington, D.C. Bar Association does the disciplining. So they think the D.C. Bar Association is sleazy and political, and the only reason lawyers in D.C. get disciplined is because it's controlled by, well, Trump wants you to believe, Democrats. Disbarring lawyers in D.C. has nothing to do with the Washington, D.C. Bar Association. And the New York Times, which I am a big defender of, their headline yesterday was wrong. The headline reads, DOJ, Department of Justice, sues District of Columbia Bar over its efforts to discipline Trump administration lawyers. Well, that's bar is a good headline word, but it's inaccurate. The DOJ isn't suing the bar. They're suing the D.C. Court of Appeals because that's who disciplines lawyers in Washington, D.C. But when you see the bar, you think, oh, the Bar Association. They don't, So Trump's DOJ right now, this week, filed a suit suing the court, not the bar in D.C., over its repeated attempts to disbar, to strip law licenses away from lawyers who assisted Donald Trump in either attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential results or assisted Donald Trump in getting even with his enemies. And this is very important because at the top of the show, I began talking about what a lawless administration this is. And his lawlessness is a cancer that's he wants to metastasize throughout our DOJ and into the courts. And this is how you do it. So it's very important to know that the judges in D.C. are the ones who are disciplining Trump's bad lawyers, corrupt lawyers. But Donald Trump, speaking of bad lawyers, is forcing Todd Blanche to tie up the courts. Todd Blanche is the acting attorney general, and Todd Blanche is tying up the courts with nonsense, sowing doubt about anyone who was either prosecuted for helping Trump or punished for helping Trump. And that's what they're trying to do right now. And I just want to go over this. The Department of Justice yesterday let it be known that they are specifically trying to protect two of Donald Trump's favorite lawyers who ended up suffering because they were willing to debase themselves and the legal profession. The first is this guy, Jeffrey Clark. Jeffrey Clark was a low-level prosecutor inside the Justice Department during the first Trump administration. In the lead up to January 6th, something like 12 to 48 hours before January 6th, Jeffrey Clark, was literally the only lawyer inside the Justice Department willing to state and put into writing that the 2020 presidential election had been stolen, that Joe Biden stole it from Trump. Bill Barr had been the attorney general, but he resigned before January 6th. He told Trump that Biden won. He went on Fox News and said Biden won. So you had acting attorney generals and acting deputy attorney generals who were running the DOJ in the lead up to January 6th. And they all told Donald Trump the same thing Bill Barr told Donald Trump, the same thing everybody inside the White House, every lawyer inside the White House told Donald Trump there's no evidence that the election was stolen. There isn't a single lawyer who was working in the White House who was willing to say the election was stolen. And there was only one lawyer in the Department of Justice, this guy, Jeffrey Clark, who was willing to put into writing there was evidence of voter fraud, especially in Georgia. There wasn't. According to the January 6th report, the Fulton County, Georgia indictments, Jeffrey Clark was indicted, and according to Jack Smith, who was indicting Trump in Washington, D.C., Trump learned who Jeffrey Clark was by Republican Congressman Scott Perry, who represents Pennsylvania's 10th congressional district, and he may lose his seat in the midterms. So Congressman Scott Perry said to Trump, you should speak to this guy, Jeffrey Clark. He'll prosecute election fraud for you in the DOJ. So by some accounts, and it's hard to say, and nobody's quite sure, including Jeffrey Clark and Donald Trump, but nobody's quite sure here, but Trump either appointed Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general just hours before January 6th, or he was about to appoint Jeffrey Clark as an acting attorney general, but was told if you did that, the entire Justice Department would quit. So nobody is quite sure if Trump actually appointed Jeffrey Clark and then was talked out of it and said, I didn't appoint him, or that he was. We do know that he met with the acting attorney general and the deputy acting attorney general, the acting deputy attorney general, and told them that he was going to appoint Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general. And we know that they said, if you do that, the entire Justice Department will quit. So Trump chickened out. But nobody's quite sure if he secretly appointed Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general first. The plan was Jeffrey Clark, and you could hear protesters gathering outside the White House for January 6th. You could hear them prepare. This was hours before January 6th. The plan was to appoint Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general, and then Clark would then name Sidney Powell, who was part of Trump's legal team, falsely claiming voter fraud. They would appoint her as a special counsel. This would be like January 5th, to look into voter fraud, and she would prove and prosecute the people who stole the 2020 election on behalf of Joe Biden. Again, she was not a White House employee, nor was Rudy Giuliani. No lawyer in the White House would pursue this. They all basically quit and told him the election hasn't been stolen. So he brought in any lawyers who would say the election was stolen with no evidence. But Sidney Powell didn't get to be the special counsel because Trump chickened out. There weren't enough loyalists inside the Department of Justice. They would all quit, and it wouldn't look good. And then January 6th took place just hours later. You're looking at Yale Law School graduate Stewart Rhodes. He's the founder of the Oath Keepers. He showed up to Washington, D.C. about 2 days before January 6th with a cache of weapons that could supply a small army, literally. He was sentenced to close to 20 years for seditious conspiracy because of the role he played on January 6th. Stewart Rhodes testified during his trial that he expected Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act on January 6th and deputize him and his Oath Keepers to, quote, restore order. And we know that Rhodes claimed at the time to be communicating with somebody inside the White House in the lead up to and after January 6th. We don't know who, but we know that Stewart Rhodes was communicating with the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys were providing security to Roger Stone and some of the people meeting at the Willard Hotel on January 5th. They were using extrajudicial security guards. I don't know who Stewart Rhodes, I think it's L. Stuart Rhodes. The L stands for loser. Okay, so we don't know who Stuart Rhodes was talking to inside the Oval Office. But we do know Sidney Powell, who was not a White House employee. She worked for Donald Trump. We do know that Sidney Powell, who Trump wanted to appoint as special counsel to prove stolen election, we do know she contributed to Stuart Rhodes's defense fund and helped raise money for him. Much of Stuart Rhodes's legal fees were paid through her foundation. Now think about this. You have Stuart Rhodes, convicted of seditious conspiracy, founder of the Oath Keepers, and his legal fees are being paid in part by Sidney Powell, who Trump wanted to appoint as special counsel to investigate the 2020 election. Very disturbing. Jeffrey Clark, seen here in his underwear during an FBI raid, they raided his home to determine what role he played on January 6th. He was indicted down in Georgia for the part he played in attempting to steal the 2020 election by putting into writing and falsely claiming that the election had been stolen down in Georgia. His law license has been suspended in Washington, D.C., and it is the courts, not the Washington, D.C. Bar Association, it is the D.C. courts who determine whether or not he keeps his law license. They are moving somewhat quickly to permanently strip Jeffrey Clark of his law license. I hope they at least give him back his pants. Trump thinks Jeffrey Clark has been unfairly treated, considering the fact that he was so loyal to Donald Trump. He's getting punished. Jeffrey Clark, in Trump's mind, is being punished because he's the only lawyer in the Justice Department who was loyal to Trump in the run-up to January 6th. Again, Jeffrey Clark was going to be acting attorney general because he was the only one in the Justice Department willing to say Biden stole the 2020 election. So Trump has ordered his acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, to help Jeffrey Clark out. That is Todd Blanche on the left, serving as Trump's lawyer in the Manhattan hush money case, where Trump was convicted and remains a felon. Blanche, now acting attorney general, before that he was Trump's defense attorney, and a bad one at that, Blanche filed a lawsuit this week on behalf of the Department of Justice, targeting the D.C. Court's Office of Disciplinary Counsel, as well as its Board on Professional Responsibility, accusing the district court of violating the Constitution by disciplining executive branch lawyers. He's saying that the D.C. Circuit Court doesn't have the jurisdiction to strip D.C. lawyers of their law licenses. Now, the argument is, since Jeffrey Clark worked inside the Justice Department, he was an employee of the executive branch. Therefore, the judicial branch, the D.C. Circuit Court and the judges on it, cannot discipline Jeffrey Clark. He must be disciplined instead by the Department of Justice, which is part of the executive branch. The problem is Donald Trump and Todd Blanche run the Justice Department, so they're not going to discipline Jeffrey Clark or strip him of his law license. The Department of Justice sits inside the executive branch, not the judicial branch. That was an act of Congress. That's not in the Constitution. The Judiciary Act, I think I don't know when it was passed. I think, I'm going to say during the I don't know. Leave a comment. If I had a guess, I would say like 1804, like maybe earlier. I don't know. I should know that. Anyway, they decided to put the Department of Justice inside the executive branch, and the president, therefore, can't be prosecuted because he's in charge of the Justice Department. That is actually not true, but that's what Blanche and Trump believe. So Trump and the people propping him up, they believe in something called the unitary executive theory. And they insist the President of the United States has sole power over the entire executive branch, all the agencies. It's the biggest branch in the government, the executive branch. All agencies answer to the executive branch. There are, 2.5 million people, not including the Pentagon, who work inside our agencies. And the people who promote the unitary executive theory, they believe a president should answer to nobody, not Congress, not to judges. You saw that with Pete Hegseth's testimony when he was asked by Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, why don't you want a war powers resolution? And he said, we believe Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president all the power he needs to decide when and if we go to war with Iran. Well, the Constitution says only Congress declares war. But this is what because they're fascists, this is not what they believe, it's what they say because it's what they want. They are arguing now that only the president can be allowed to strip Jeffrey Clark of his license to practice law in D.C. And if he's going to be disciplined for crimes or misconduct committed while working inside the Trump Justice Department, it would be up to either Trump or who's ever president to discipline him. This is complete and utter garbage, but it's a sign of loyalty. Trump is saying, I will fight to the death for anybody who is loyal to me. This is all about showing loyalty to the craven opportunists who debase themselves and the legal profession on behalf of Donald Trump. So I don't know what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen to this country. I suspect Jeffrey Clark will be that rare legal eagle who does lose his license and won't be able to practice law in D.C. Again, I think Blanche is going to fail at this. Again, this is an act of loyalty on behalf of Trump because of the loyalty Jeffrey Clark showed him. The Department of Justice is suing the Washington, D.C. Disciplinary Board on behalf of Jeffrey Clark and this MAGA legal warrior, Ed Martin, who is in charge of the Justice Department's pardon office. He had to take the job in the pardon office because Trump knew he could never get the Senate to confirm Ed Martin as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. I'll get to that. Well, Martin was one of the defense attorneys who assisted many of the January Sixers in their defense, including a Proud Boy, as well as Joseph Padilla, a January Sixer sentenced to 6 years in prison for beating a Capitol police officer over the head with a flagpole. So Ed Martin, a disciple of Phyllis Schlafly, ultra-right-winger from Missouri, Ed Martin served briefly last year as interim U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., but he wasn't going to get confirmed, so he was transferred to the pardon office inside the Justice Department. And he was also part of a task force that was supposed to look into the weaponization of the Justice Department during the Biden administration. Anybody who was prosecuted by Merrick Garland, like the January Sixers, They are victims of the Justice Department being weaponized. This is Trump rewriting history, okay? Judge Jeanine Pirro from Fox News and the TV show Judge Jeanine was appointed and confirmed as U.S. Attorney for D.C. The Senate was okay with her. Jeanine Pirro's husband, Albert Pirro, now her ex-husband, he is a real estate attorney who was convicted of tax evasion in 2000. It was so bad he served 11 months in a federal prison. Apparently more than $1 million he didn't pay the government. Before that conviction, he was Donald Trump's attorney, handling land use issues in the suburbs in and around New York City. And Trump pardoned Pirro, Albert Pirro, with 45 minutes left in his presidency back in 2020. He pardoned Pirro. Pirro had already gotten out of prison, but the pardon, because he's a lawyer, allows him to make money doing legal things. Back to Ed Martin, who was a MAGA culture warrior. During Ed Martin's brief tenure last year as U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., he wrote a letter to Georgetown University warning that he personally would refuse to hire anybody from their law school unless they rescinded their DEI policy. He said the U.S. Attorney's Office for Washington, D.C. will not take any Georgetown University law students unless your university gets rid of its DEI policy. Well, in March of this year, the Office of Disciplinary Counsel for District of Columbia, this would be, they're the ones who determine if you're going to keep your license, or they formally charged Ed Martin with professional misconduct. They stated he used government coercion to suppress protected viewpoints of Georgetown University, and that violates the Fifth Amendment and the First Amendment. Again, that isn't the D.C. Bar Association. That is the 9-member board on professional responsibility, which is composed of 7 attorneys and 2 non-lawyer citizens, and they answer to the D.C. Court of Appeals when it comes to disciplining lawyers. They're the first eyes on a complaint, and they decide whether or not it gets escalated to the judges. This is not a professional trade organization like the California Bar Association. They don't protect their own. So Ed Martin is now facing the possibility of his license being suspended or permanently stripped in Washington, D.C. This is why Todd Blanche and the Department of Justice are suing, claiming the D.C. Disciplinary Board has no jurisdiction over the Department of Justice lawyers because the disciplinary board is nested inside the judicial branch and the Justice Department is nested inside the executive branch. Therefore, it must be the executive branch that disciplines Justice Department lawyers. It's the supremacy clause that they're claiming. It's utter garbage. According to this logic, anybody working inside the executive branch can commit a crime while working inside the executive branch, and it's up to Donald Trump to decide whether to prosecute them. And that's what these people believe. But they couldn't. The Justice Department could prosecute them, but by this logic, they couldn't bring it into a courtroom because that's the judiciary branch. So it's unconstitutional, according to these cretins. one of the things we've learned is lawyers will say anything. Anything. For example, this is Dean John Sauer. He's now our Solicitor General of the United States. He was nominated by Trump and confirmed by the United States Senate. It is the job of the Solicitor General to represent the federal government in cases before the Supreme Court. The Solicitor General is the fourth highest ranking member of the Justice Department, D. John Sauer, who previously served as one of Donald Trump's attorneys and ended up arguing the presidential immunity case before the Supreme Court. Some of you might remember this. It was in April of 2024. That's when oral arguments on presidential immunity were heard before the court. J.D. Sauer, now our Solicitor General, but back then one of Trump's criminal lawyers, J.D. Sauer stood before the Supreme Court on behalf of Donald Trump and argued that they need to toss out all of Jack Smith's criminal indictments against Donald Trump because an ex-president has total immunity from prosecution for any crime he may or may not have committed while in office. This is on tape. He argued before the Supreme Court that if a president of the United States ordered the assassination of his political opponent while running for re-election, if a president ordered the assassination of his political opponent, the only way he could ever face trial is if he was impeached by Congress, tried in the Senate, and then convicted by the Senate. Our current Solicitor General, J.D. Sauer, said only then could an ex-president be tried in a criminal court for attempting to kill his political opponent. That was J.D. Sauer's argument 2 years ago in the immunity case. Now, the Supreme Court didn't agree with him totally. They came close in their final ruling, but not really. I do believe had Jack Smith's office not been dissolved, his superseding indictments would have been upheld by the Supreme Court if Trump lost to Kamala Harris. So that's J.D. That's Sauer, the Solicitor General, fourth highest ranking member of the Justice Department. And he and Ed Martin are both from the same ultra-right-wing Republican mafia back in Missouri. Sauer's father is a wealthy right-wing donor, hates abortion, and he gave money to Ed Martin when Martin was running, I think, for State Attorney General of Missouri. Now, here's where it gets really just, okay, all right. Also working with Todd Blanche on this lawsuit against the D.C. Disciplinary Board is Stanley Woodward Jr., who was confirmed by the Senate in October of last year. He is now, Stanley Woodward is now the third highest ranking official inside the Justice Department. I have a lot of new listeners, so they probably don't remember 2 years ago when I wouldn't shut up about Stanley Woodward, Stanley Woodward, Stanley Woodward. I kept saying, keep an eye on Stanley Woodward. Now, I'll get back to Stanley Woodward in a second. When Trump's second administration began, you had at the top of the DOJ Pam Bondi, who served as Florida's Attorney General. She failed to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein when she was Florida's Attorney General. This while hundreds of victims down in Florida were stepping forward and filing civil lawsuits against Jeffrey Epstein in the state of Florida. But the Attorney General of the state of Florida had no interest in opening up an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. And then she was put in charge of releasing the Epstein files, and the rest is history repeating itself. So immediately after leaving her job as Florida Attorney General, she served 8 years. You got to be elected. She served 8 years as Florida's Attorney General. Bondi, and remember, as State Attorney General in Florida, she agreed to and then backed out of a civil lawsuit against Trump University. She backed out of it just weeks after receiving a huge campaign donation from Donald Trump. There was a consortium of states' attorney generals suing Trump University, and she was going to be part of it, and then she got a donation from Donald Trump, and she said, I don't want to prosecute him. And she served as one of Donald Trump's lawyers during his first impeachment trial in 2020. So the head of the Justice Department was Pam Bondi, who was Donald Trump's lawyer. She defended him during the first impeachment trial. And then the number two inside the Justice Department was Trump's criminal defense attorney, Todd Blanche. She is now the acting attorney general, and he wants to get nominated. The number three person at the Department of Justice when the new Trump administration began in 2025. So the number three person, right underneath Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, was that homunculus on the right. No, not that homunculus. The other homunculus, this homunculus. Not Trump, the homunculus to the left of Trump. Emil Bove, who, according to whistleblowers, told Justice Department lawyers in February 2025. Now, Bove was waiting for Todd Blanche to be confirmed by the Senate as Deputy Attorney General. So Bove, as the number three guy, was temporarily the number two guy at the Justice Department, waiting for Todd Blanche to get confirmed. And he reportedly told Justice Department lawyers in February of 2025 that in order for Trump to enforce his draconian immigration policy, U.S. attorneys have to be willing to tell judges to go F themselves. He said the actual F word. He said, you're going to have to be willing to cooperate with Trump by not cooperating with judges and defying their orders, which is why those three planes, I think it was March 15th of last year, one of them carrying Abrego Garcia, took off despite Judge Boasberg saying they're not allowed to take off. They took off, and about 280 immigrants were thrown into that El Salvadoran torture chamber. They defied Judge Boasberg's order. He's been trying to get these guys on contempt, and so far it's not working. So Emil Bove is an insufferable human being with anger issues. He can't get along with coworkers. Bondi wanted him gone, and Trump nominated to get rid of him. Bove last year got nominated for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in New Jersey and was confirmed by the Senate despite perjuring himself. Most people agree Bove allegedly perjured himself during his June confirmation hearings last year. He stated under oath, I never told U.S. attorneys to tell judges to go F themselves, despite at least one whistleblower coming forward wanting to testify. But Chuck Grassley, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, refused to allow the whistleblower or whistleblowers to testify. He also testified under oath that he didn't fire DOJ attorneys for prosecuting January 6ers. He said there was no purge of January 6ers. Well, we saw Kash Patel's testimony where he said I fired people for weaponizing the Justice Department, which is dog whistle code for prosecuting the January 6ers. So most people think he perjured himself then, and he also probably perjured himself when he denied offering New York City Mayor Eric Adams a deal in which the Department of Justice would drop Biden-era bribery charges against Mayor Adams if Mayor Adams agreed to cooperate with ICE. So all of his claims that he didn't instruct lawyers to defy judges, that he didn't have a quid pro quo deal with Eric Adams, that he didn't purge the DOJ of any attorneys who prosecuted the January 6ers, all of those claims are provably false. And it's why so many people believe he committed perjury. But now he's a judge in New Jersey. And the person who replaced Emil Bove as the number 3 man at the Justice Department is Stanley Woodward. Stanley Woodward. Again, if you listened to my show 2-3 years ago, I wouldn't shut up about Stanley Woodward. Stanley Woodward. Now, you might remember earlier I told you about Sidney Powell, who Trump planned to make special counsel like hours before January 6th. He was going to make Sidney Powell a special counsel who would investigate voter fraud and prove Biden stole the election. The entire DOJ threatened to quit if she was appointed special counsel. And the idea was Jeffrey Clark would be appointed acting attorney general in the final days of the Trump administration. That was the plan. All right, you might remember now Sidney Powell helped pay the legal defense for Stewart Rhodes, the Yale Law School graduate and founder of the Oath Keepers, who was sentenced to nearly 20 years for seditious conspiracy for the role he played on January 6th. Trump commuted his sentence. So you got Sidney Powell, who's Trump's lawyer, paying Stewart Rhodes's legal fees for where he was convicted for seditious conspiracy. Now, also tried and convicted for seditious conspiracy on January 6th was this guy, Kelly Meggs, on the far left. He is the founder of the Florida Oath Keepers. Would you agree that these are not good people, that these are people who came to Washington, D.C. with intent to deprive us of our civil liberties? They came fully armed on January 6th. They were expecting to be deputized by Donald Trump after he invoked the Insurrection Act. These are the Oath Keepers. That's his wife on the right, and on the left is Kelly Meggs, founder of the Oath Keepers in Florida. Now, Connie Meggs was sentenced to 1.5 years for her role on January 6th, but Kelly Meggs was sentenced to 12 years for seditious conspiracy for the role he played on January 6th. We have people involved with January 6th convicted for seditious conspiracy. And Kelly Meggs's lawyer was Stanley Woodward, who is currently the number 3 man at the Justice Department. The number 3 man at the Justice Department defended Kelly Meggs, the founder of the Florida Oath Keepers. And he did a bad job defending him because Kelly Meggs was sentenced to 12 years for seditious conspiracy for the role he played on January 6th. The number 3 man at the Justice Department, Stanley Woodward, defended at least one other January 6er and is believed his legal fees were paid by Donald Trump's Save America super PAC. It is estimated that between 2021 and 2024, Donald Trump's Save America super PAC paid Stanley Woodward $1.4 million that we know of. He was paid $1.4 million to represent several defendants in Trump world, including Kelly Miggs, the founder of the Florida Oath Keepers, the number 3 man at the Justice Department right now. Stanley Woodward was getting paid by Donald Trump's Save America super PAC, and was also getting money from Sidney Powell's foundation. The number 3 man right now in the Justice Department, Stanley Woodward, got paid at least $1.4 million from Donald Trump's Save America super PAC, and then some undisclosed amount of money from Sidney Powell's foundation to defend several people inside Donald Trump's orbit. And one of those people inside Trump's orbit was Kelly Miggs, the founder of the Florida Oath Keepers, who was convicted of seditious conspiracy for the role he played on January 6th. He is considered to be in Trump's orbit. Stanley Woodward is defending using Donald Trump's super PAC money and Sidney Powell's foundation money to defend an Oath Keeper. His legal fees, at least a good portion of them, were either paid for by Donald Trump's super PAC or Sidney Powell's super PAC. It all got thrown into a big Stanley Woodward bucket. Now, the Save America super PAC was set up immediately after Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden in 2020. Donald Trump created the Save America super PAC on November 9th, 2020, right after losing to Joe Biden. He raised $135 million from 2020 to 2024, $135 million from small donors who believed him when he said all that money would go towards investigating and proving that the 2020 election was stolen. So people sent money to him, small donors. You're looking at some of the lawyers Trump brought in to investigate that voter fraud in the lead up to January 6th. He sets up the super PAC on November 9th. January 6th happens 2 months later, right? You're looking, who do we have here? You got Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, and Sidney Powell. Those are some of the lawyers who traveled all over the country. Turns out on their own dime, they never got paid by Donald Trump, even though he raised $135 million from small donors for his Save America super PAC, and that money was supposed to go to people like Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, and Sidney Powell as they traveled around the country investigating and proving voter fraud, that the 2020 election was stolen. But they never got paid. Rudy kept asking to get paid, never got paid. So in total, Trump raised about $250 million in addition to the, what did I say he raised? He raised, what do we got here? $135 million for the Save America super PAC. And then he raised $250 million for his, what is called his joint Save America PAC, which he had a split with the Republican Party. So he got to keep $125 million from that super PAC. Those are Rudy's, Sidney Powell's, and Jenna Ellis's mugshots after they were arrested and indicted down in Georgia for spreading lies about the 2020 election. Now, that RICO trial was thrown out because Georgia is ultimately controlled by Republicans. But never forget that Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell ended up pleading guilty. Giuliani, from what some say, he was ready to flip in the Georgia case, but the prosecutor, Fani Willis, before this got thrown out, I don't want to get into why it was thrown out. I've been over that. Fani Willis signaled to Rudy, we believe, no deals for you, Rudy. You can't flip. You're why I put this RICO prosecution together in the first place. It was the chain. In a RICO, it's a mob chart, and at the top was Trump, and right below was Rudy, and the Rudy couldn't flip. Now, these three lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and Jenna Ellis, had to hire lawyers. They were indicted, and not a single penny of their legal fees were paid for by Donald Trump's Save America super PAC. He made about close to $300 million in 3 years from that Save America super PAC, and not a penny went to his lawyers, even when they got indicted. They didn't get paid for the work they did lying about voter fraud. And then when they got indicted for doing the work and lying about voter fraud, they had to pay for their own lawyers. I mean, they got doubly screwed. Kelly Meggs, founder of the Florida Oath Keepers, who showed up on January 6th, his legal fees were paid for, not exactly by Donald Trump, but it came from Donald Trump. It was all, the money from the Save America super PAC and Sidney Powell's foundation was all thrown into the Stanley Woodward bucket to pay Kelly Meggs's attorney fees for Stanley Woodward, as well as paying the legal fees for this guy, Walt Nauta. He is Trump's body man. He's Trump's valet, who ended up getting indicted by Jack Smith in the mishandling of classified documents case. Remember the mishandling of classified documents? Remember all those documents Trump tucked away safely inside the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago? Well, that classified documents case, if Kamala Harris had defeated Trump, then I believe Trump would have been defeated also by Jack Smith. I think Jack Smith would have gotten him on the classified documents case, even though it was thrown out by Eileen Cannon, who's a fool. I also believe that Jack Smith would have gotten Trump on wire fraud. Bernard Kerik, who just passed away, he was police commissioner for Rudy Giuliani. He went to prison for, I think it was tax fraud. Bernard Kerik, Rudy Giuliani's right-hand man, they had set up a special apartment for first responders right after January 6th so they could sleep and shower, but they couldn't use the apartment because Bernard Kerik was using it as a love nest for his mistresses. Bernard Kerik, he ended up going to prison. When he came out, he and Rudy were traveling around the country trying to investigate and prove that Joe Biden stole the 2020 election. When he spoke to Jack Smith, he was called in. From what we understand, Bernard Kerik was infuriated that he and Rudy Giuliani had never been paid by Trump for the work they did. And he broached the subject with Jack Smith on the subject of wire fraud. And I believe had Kamala Harris won, Jack Smith would still be there. And I think it's voter fraud. It's wire fraud. When you promise Americans, give me money, give to my Save America super PAC, and I'll investigate election fraud, and you use that money instead to pay your legal fees and Melania's stylist and travel. That's wire fraud. We have also learned, and we also have reason to believe, that had Jack Smith not had to dissolve his office, they were using those hundreds of millions of dollars given to the Save America Super PAC to coerce people not to flip on Donald Trump. If you're willing, we saw a pattern here. If you keep your mouth shut and stay loyal, we'll pay your legal fees. But if you turn state's evidence, you're on your own. And Jack Smith was very concerned about Stanley Woodward, who is now the number 3 man at the Justice Department. It was becoming very apparent to Jack Smith that Stanley Woodward was providing legal counsel to Trump World only if they didn't cooperate with Jack Smith. This is Yuscil Taveras. He worked for Trump as the IT director at Mar-a-Lago. He ran the videotapes, the security cameras, and then sold them to Jeffrey Epstein. That's not even a joke. I suspect a lot of things were being videotaped in Palm Beach for a time, but he was videotaping. He ran the security cameras. Now, he testified under oath before Jack Smith's grand jury on the classified documents. He testified under oath that he knew nothing about any efforts to wipe clean the security videos of Trump employees who were moving boxes of classified documents in order to hide them from the FBI when the FBI was searching Mar-a-Lago for them. Then Yuscil Taveras was told by Jack Smith's office, we might charge you with perjury. We have reason to believe that you were pressured to wipe clean those videos. And Yuscil Taveras, some of you might remember, decided to turn state's evidence to cooperate with Jack Smith. But in order to do so, he said, I can no longer have Stanley Woodward as my attorney. Why? What's that about? Why did he immediately say, I can't have Stanley Woodward as my attorney? Woodward was not just representing Yuscil Taveras, he was also representing Walt Nauta, Trump's valet, his body man, as well as the Mar-a-Lago property manager. He was representing all these people in Trump world who were indicted in the classified documents case for obstruction of justice, for hiding the boxes from the FBI. And Yuscil Taveras flipped. He said, yeah, I didn't tell the truth the first time. He said, I'm going to get my own public defender, not Stanley Woodward. And then he testified that Walt Nauta, Trump's valet, as well as the property manager, Mar-a-Lago, pressured him to delete the video footage of several people moving classified boxes in order to hide them from the FBI. Had Jack Smith been allowed to pursue the classified documents case to its logical conclusion, I believe Stanley Woodward, who is now the number 3 man inside the Justice Department, I believe Stanley Woodward and the Save America PAC, the joint Save America PAC, would have been in Jack Smith's crosshairs. I think Stanley Woodward, well, we learned a lot from Cassidy Hutchinson. Remember her? She worked for Mark Meadows, who was Trump's White House chief of staff before, during, and after January 6th. We learned from her that Trump World willingly provides free legal counsel, but only if you remain loyal to Trump. But it pulls legal counsel from you if you end up telling the truth. Now, she went public with the Trump attorney who said to her, say you can't remember and there's a job waiting for you in Trump World. All you have to do is say you don't remember. And then she got sued by that lawyer for going public with that story. What makes Trump more dangerous today than he was in the lead up to January 6th is back then Trump was a novice and he hadn't stacked the Department of Justice with loyalists. But now the number one man inside the Justice Department is Todd Blanche, who was Trump's criminal defense attorney. Stanley Woodward, who defended the founder of the Florida Oath Keepers, who ended up getting convicted of seditious conspiracy for the role he played on January 6th. Stanley Woodward, who would provide legal counsel to people in Trump World so long as they kept their mouth shut. Stanley Woodward is the number 3 man at the Department of Justice. And D. John Sauer is the Solicitor General for the United States. He's the number 4 man at the Department of Justice. The same D. John Sauer who told the Supreme Court with a straight face that Donald Trump could order the assassination of his political opponent and you couldn't prosecute him unless he was impeached and convicted in the Senate, and you would have to do that after he left office. In other words, in order to prosecute a former president for ordering the assassination of a political opponent, like Bolsonaro did, and he's now locked up. According to D. John Sauer, who is now the Solicitor General, an ex-president would have to be impeached in Congress and convicted in the Senate before he could be criminally tried. Then he would lose all his presidential immunity. You might remember the second Trump impeachment was during the Biden administration. You can impeach a president after they leave office. That's what the Solicitor General says, the kind of power a president has. Todd Blanche, number 1 at the DOJ. Stanley Woodward, number 3 at the DOJ. D. John Sauer, number 4 at the DOJ. And who's number 2? They're all number 2. There is no number 2 there. But they're all number 2 because I wanted to do a duty joke. There are many reasons Hitler was able to perform so much evil. One of the chief reasons was he didn't break any laws. At least according to the judges and the prosecutors he packed into Germany's legal system. Hitler took power through brute physical and legal force. Laws were passed, the Enabling Act. There were laws forbidding non-Germans from procreating with real Germans. Laws were passed. Laws were enforced that made his entire nightmare, on paper, perfectly legal. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. All right, I did it. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do a show Today, let's see, I kept it short. Thank you for listening to me. My back pain is related to suppressed rage. And it's fascinating. The pain, except for the fact that it's debilitating, it's fascinating when my back goes out because I'm in such a rage over everything, not just what's going on in the world. Anyway, thank you. I wanted to do this show. We go live every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:05 p.m. And I did that 6 weeks straight. This show is the first time I broke the schedule, but I couldn't help it. We're going to do a watch party Saturday night. I don't know what it's going to be yet. I'm going to get some sleep, but it starts at 8:30. Leave a comment. I was on muscle relaxers, so if I misspoke, if I said anything wrong, leave a comment. Let me know. I issue corrections on this show. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. I don't know if they made it today. This was kind of scattered. And leave a comment. Like this episode, please. Share it. And go to my newsletter. Go to my website, davidfeldmanshow.com. Get my newsletter. I want to be able to reach you without having to go through Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google. And the best way is if you sign up for my newsletter. I promise you I don't give away. Unlike most candidates, I won't sell my email list, and I won't abuse you. I won't abuse your inbox. And yes, I was trying to sound dirty. Thank you.